Okay, so welcome. Hopefully you can, the slide you can see is the map of where I went. Is that thumbs up? Yeah. Okay, thank you, just to make sure. So I thought I would start with a map so you could kind of get a sense of where I went. So the trip started in a little town called Ushuaia at the very southern tip of Argentina. So this is South America. Can you guys see my cursor when I move it around? Oh, excellent. Okay, that's helpful to know. So to get to Ushuaia, I flew from Calgary to Montreal to Sao Paulo to Buenos Aires to Ushuaia. And one of my good friends has been there before. And prior to the trip, I told her this was not extremely helpful. She shared with me that it was the most terrifying flight she had ever taken in her entire life. It's so windy in Patagonia. So Patagonia is like the name for the whole southern part of South America, both the Argentina side and the Chile side. And so I was just expecting the worst, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So Ushuaia is the leaving place for probably 90% of the trips to the Antarctic. Some people leave, like from even Buenos Aires or from a little town in the Chile side, but most people leave from Ushuaia. We went down to this area right here, which is it's called the Antarctic Peninsula. So Antarctica is this huge round continent, a little bit bigger than Australia and a little bit smaller than the US. So it's very large. It's pretty roundish. And it's got this little peninsula sticking way up towards South America. Most people, including us, just visited that tip. And even then, it's quite, in midsummer, I was there in January, so that's like July, right? So I was there in midsummer and it was 0 degrees centigrade. So you can imagine if you went further south to what we would call the mainland of Antarctica, it would be even colder. There are places in the inland of Antarctica, Vostok Station, which is a Russian research station, where the average temperature, so not high, not low, not summer, not winter, the overall average temperature is -90 centigrade, -90. So we didn't go there. We didn't go to the South Pole. If you approach the continent itself, you're gonna, there's gonna be a lot of ice. It's much harder to travel. So we just really went to this little tip. And our tour was supposed to go to the west side. I'm not sure what it was we were meant to see there, but we didn't go there because it was extremely windy. And the captain ascertained that would be a bad idea to go to the west side. So we came along to the east side and we tucked in some of these little coves and islands at this northern tip. And it was, as you'll see from some of my slides, pretty pleasant. From there, we went to this little dot. So I'm going to come back to this little dot. So just get a picture of where it is and how small it is. That's Elephant Island, very significant island for historical reasons. And then we went to South Georgia. Again, take a look at the distance of open sea between Elephant Island and South Georgia. South Georgia is really considered like the place in the entire world that has the densest population of wildlife. And David Attenborough, of course, on the ship, we were watching David Attenborough specials like continuously. So he loves South Georgia. He's done numerous documentaries there, and he calls it, the jewel of the ocean. Now, we were supposed to go from South Georgia to the Falkland Islands and then back to Ushuaia, but you can see that didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is because as we were about to leave for the Falklands, the weather report showed that it was basically hurricane force winds around the Falklands, and they have a rule in the Falklands that if the wind is greater than 60 miles per hour, it's a British colony, they use the imperial system, that they don't let any ships dock. So if we had gone there, we wouldn't have been able to get off the ship, which would have made it pointless. So instead, the captain decided to go down here, which is called the South Orkneys. It's so little frequented that the captain didn't actually have soundings for some of the places we went. So he was like, you know, they don't really like going to places where they don't know how deep the water is or if there's underwater rocks. But we were very lucky. Our captain was incredible. And throughout the entire 3 weeks, you know, he basically kept us safe and kept us from being too seasick. So that's kind of the outline of what you're going to see. So going back to my first comment, I said how I was expecting Patagonia to be an incredibly rough flight. After I got to Buenos Aires, I was exhausted because I hadn't slept in like over a day. And when I got on I was expecting a little like DC-10 or something to Ushuaia, but in fact, it was like a huge jumbo jet. And for some reason that I can't understand, I got put in first class, which meant the seats reclined. Yes. So it was like a 4-hour flight. As soon as I got in the plane, probably within seconds, I fell asleep. And when I woke up, this is what I saw. It was the smoothest flight I've ever been on in my entire life. It was absolutely gorgeous. And I got this incredible view of Patagonia. So this is the Argentinian side of Patagonia. And this, I believe, is the Beagle Channel, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. So this is on the ground at Ushuaia Airport. You can see it's highly technical. So basically people came running out and they, like with human power, pulled these carts over to the plane, dumped all the bags, pushed them into the terminal. There's only 2 carousels in the terminal. And I was, of course, thrilled because my bags made it. After 4 flights, you know, the number of things that could go wrong are logarithmic, but I was extremely lucky. And this is the town of Ushuaia. So it's very, very scenic, set, you know, under these mountains. And I think I took out the picture, but I actually climbed up to this glacier right here. It's called Mirador Glacier. And that gave like a beautiful view of the whole town. This isn't from the glacier, but we also took the city tour. I put in air quotes because, you know, the city's pretty small. The tour was an hour. But it was fun to hear about different things. And you can see, not sure if it's too evident here, but what I did notice is like right here, for example, there was a lot of unfinished construction. And I think it was because the Argentinian economy is in a free fall, basically. There's rampant inflation. I looked online while I was in Ushuaia, the 3 months of the Argentinian peso, like from November to January, it had dropped 30% against the US dollar. So every time we went to buy something, I put a little video on my TikTok channel on this. Like, you never know how much it would be. You had no idea because there was 3 different official exchange rates and they're all dramatically different. And you had no idea any store you went into, which one they were going to use. So it was like, you just like closed your eyes, pushed click on the machine and hoped for the best. But this is Chile over here. Very beautiful. And this is the Beagle Channel that separates the 2 countries. So this is the port, and this is not our ship, but it gives you an idea of what expedition ships look like. So they're not huge cruise ships. They're totally different. They're very small. Most of these ships had somewhere between 70 and 200 passengers. These two are called Quark expeditions. That's a very famous, well thought of company. Not on this day, but there was a National Geographic ship. There were several extraordinarily beautiful European ships. Like there was a French one that looked spectacular. And you'll see a couple features. So for example, this one has a helicopter on the top. So we thought this might be a higher end tour so that if you got sick or had a heart attack, they would be able to get you to safety. Our ship did not have a helicopter. And then this one, you can barely see it, but at the top, there's a bunch of zodiacs. So zodiacs are black, inflatable, motorized rafts. It's how you get off the ship and either just ride around in them to see stuff or actually get taken to land on the days when it was possible to land. So all expedition ships have zodiacs. There's 10 people in a zodiac, and in the Antarctic, only 100 people are allowed to be on land at any one time. So that's why 200 is about the maximum number of people on a ship, because you can imagine a 4,000 person cruise ship, it would be impossible. You'd never get off the ship and you'd never be able to see anything up close. So this is the Beagle Channel. We left port at about 7:30 at night. I think we were kind of eating dinner as we pulled out. It's midsummer there, so it's 24-hour light. And so it was just kind of dusky like this, like the entire night. And there's something about the Beagle Channel, the light was just magical. Like I was just entranced. We were all out on the back deck taking pictures for like well into the night. And the Beagle Channel is named after HMS Beagle, Darwin's ship. So Darwin came here in like the 1840s or 50s, and he was one of the first explorers. And so this body of water was named after him. So this is as dark as it got. This is night. And it was just kind of spectacular. None of us wanted to go to bed. So I've split the maps up so that you can see in more detail where we went. So this is the Antarctic Peninsula. And as you can see, we barely stepped foot in Antarctica proper. Just literally one day we were on the actual mainland, and all the other days we were near or on some of the islands, which are part of Antarctica, but strictly speaking, not the mainland. So just a little bit of history. This is the South Pole. We did not go there. That's like a couple thousand kilometers away. But just to give a little bit of background, Antarctica was and is an uninhabited continent. There's no indigenous people in Antarctica. I think primarily because it's so cold that there's no plants. There's not even tiny mosses or lichens on the actual continent. So it's not really an inhabitable place. The people that came to Antarctica and South Georgia and in the environs of Antarctica historically were whalers and sealers. So I'm going to show you some more disturbing photos of that later. But by the 1930s, just before the Second World War, most of the endemic species of Antarctica were very, very close to extinction. So the whales, the seals, probably the penguins weren't. They had been, the whalers and the sealers ate lots of penguins, but there's millions. So I think the penguins were probably okay. But even things like the albatross and the other seabirds were almost extinct. And I'll talk a little bit more about why. But mostly the whales and the seals, they were just being slaughtered. So after the war, a group of 9 countries cooperated to form what's called the Antarctic Treaty, which came into being in 1959. And it's basically to preserve the entire continent and the water around the continent for the environment, for the benefit of the whole world, and for science. So there's no permanent residence on Antarctica at all, even now. It's just too harsh. There's about somewhere, but I might have the number wrong. I think it's between 40 and 50 science research stations. They're all spread out. I don't think they talk to each other that much. They're all different run by different countries. So the flags here are the original countries that signed the treaty. So it's South Africa, Belgium, Japan, France, UK, US, Norway, Australia, Russia, which at that time was USSR. And I think this one here on the end is New Zealand. And this one might be either Argentina or Chile. So all of these countries, even during the Cold War, have more or less cooperated, and there's been very few breaches of the Antarctic Treaty. So we had a historian on board that told us, like, in extensive detail how this has all progressed, and he said this is really a success story. Okay. So the first way that you know you're in Antarctica is because you see these little guys, black and white penguins. You can see the land is totally stark, right? There's no greenery, and there's a few icebergs, so you can see it's pretty cold. What I had no idea about is that penguins don't just swim under the water like seals. They actually porpoise. They fly out of the water and back in and go like that. So the entire time, except when we were at sea, but whenever we were around land, we were surrounded by penguins porpoising. So this is a very, very short video to show you what it looks like. So penguins, when they're standing up, look kind of like flat, but when they're porpoising, they're like torpedoes. So just watch their body shape. I'll show you again because it was way too quick. So cool. So we saw that virtually every day. There was just penguins everywhere when we were pretty close to land. Oh. And you can see back here, you know, lots of big icebergs. So this is an example. So this is a day where we didn't go to shore. We got into the zodiacs. This is an example of the zodiac. We called ourselves the Blue Penguins. So all of us passengers were given identical blue jackets with fluorescent yellow hoods, so that if we fell in the water, which is 2 degrees centigrade, the red coats, this person right here with a red jacket, would be able to save us. And they were actually practicing these drills during the trip. So there would be days I'd look over the edge of the ship and there's people in zodiacs jumping in the water so that the other people could practice saving them. And I thought, boy, that is dedication. I don't think I would be signing up for that. So, and this gives you a close-up of the zodiac. So there's no railings, right? You just sit here on the edge, your feet are on the floor, and you try not to lean back. So we were kind of warned, you know, if you're taking a picture of something, try to sit up and rotate, but don't really lean back to take the picture, because if you fall in, that's going to make everybody pretty cranky. So this is a pretty typical day, a little bit wavy, not crazy, and it's too wavy. Of course, we didn't go out in the zodiacs. It was raining, you can see that. There's ice floating everywhere. This is our ship. Behind the ship is a massive glacier. So Antarctica is almost entirely glaciated. And then these icebergs calve off from the glacier. And that day we didn't go to shore. It was too rough. So we just kind of went around and saw the following sight. So this is an Adelie penguin colony. And we saw many, many colonies eat. This was not by any means the largest. If you look really carefully, you'll see that the ground looks kind of pinkish. It's because Adelie penguins are obligate krill eaters. They only eat krill. They don't eat anything else. And krill are like little shrimp that are about 1 to 2 inches long, and they're pink. And so this is all penguin guano. So not only, this was a multi-sensory experience, the trip, so you could see it, you could hear the penguins. I've got some recordings of them, I think a little bit later, and you could definitely smell them. So when you got a certain distance from the colony, it was very obvious you were approaching penguins. So the reason I chose to go, the Antarctic tourist season is from early November to late March. And I chose to go in January because I wanted to see babies. So if you go in November, the babies aren't born yet. So if you look, I'll have more later on, but if you look, some of the birds are white and black, and some of the birds are like brown, fuzzy blobs. Those are the babies. The parents go fishing constantly. So you can see these penguins down by the water. They're all adults. They'll stand there and then they'll kind of like jump and dive in the water. Porpoise, 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 eat lots of fish, come back, like pop out of the water, climb up this quite steep hill and find their own offspring out of like the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands that are there. It's remarkable. So this is, again, a close-up of some icebergs. They were, especially when the sun came out, they were really blue. And this is a video, so you won't really be able to hear me, but it just gives you a bit of an idea of the landscape and the wind. Back here, it's really a black and white landscape. There's no green, yellow, red, anything. Very stark. Just in a second, I'm going to show you the front of the ship. When in Antarctic territory, they fly the Antarctic flag.
And I'm just trying to show you a little bit of the landscape.
And over
it's
here,
quite bleak because, of course, there's no vegetation whatsoever. It's far too cold.
Right, and my hands would get freezing, right? So all my videos are
all the mountains and
I have like
islands
my
around.
minus 20 bits on.
Lots and lots of icebergs.
And then I take them off to film something, and then I
It's
like,
a pretty
okay, we're
unique
done. I gotta put
landscape.
my mitts back on.
We're hoping today to get ashore to a historic.
And you could hear the wind, right? That's what it was like 24/7. Oh. So one of our first landings was at this place called Snow Hill Island. And the reason we came here was to see this extremely famous hut. And here to the right, you can see you can see everyone has big mitts, multiple layers under these outer clothes, our blue Intrepid jackets with the red, the fluorescent yellow hoods. We all had our life vests on and our backpacks. So there's so many rules in Antarctica. You're not allowed to touch anything. So when you get off the Zodiac, you're not allowed to sit, kneel, pee. If you need to pee, you have to go back to the ship. You can't put any of your equipment on the ground. You have to be totally self-contained. Most of our landings were 1 to 2 hours, right? They were pretty short because of all these rules and because we would go on and then the other half of the people still had to come to the landing. So this is one of the very few places that had a flat beach, like possibly the only place we went where there's actually a beach. This hut is called the Nordenskjold hut. I'm sure I'm not, if anyone's Swedish, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that properly. It was built in 1901 by 6 Swedish explorers during what's called the heroic age of Antarctic expeditions, where Nobody had yet made it to the South Pole. Nobody had traversed the continent. Everybody wanted to be the first. So people did extraordinary things to try to, I guess, get their name going down in history. You can see here, there's a flag, right? It's blowing straight. These poles were like moving like this. The poles were put in by our expedition crew to corral us to the areas that we were allowed to go. We weren't allowed to just wander freely. This little tiny hut housed 6 men who were dropped off by their Swedish ship with enough supplies for a year. They were one of the first teams that decided they would on purpose overwinter in Antarctica. Already daunting, right? It's 0 degrees in midsummer. You can imagine what it's like in midwinter. Unfortunately, what happened is that the next summer, the ice never broke up and the ship couldn't come back to get them. So they ended up staying here two entire years instead of 1 with no extra supplies. So they ate penguins and seals. So the way it works apparently is you kill some seals. The seals have blubber. You use the blubber to burn for heat to cook the penguins. According to people's diaries, some of these explorers, neither penguins nor seals are especially yummy. And many of the explorers got scurvy because it's a pure meat. So this is a carnivore, hardcore keto diet, right? There's not a single leaf or plant anywhere. So the only potential greenery you would get is maybe if the krill ate some diatoms and then the penguin ate the krill and then you eat the penguin, you might indirectly escape. But most of these people ended up with scurvy. We were able to climb up here. Off the edge of the photo to the right is a camp of Argentinian researchers. So they're literally living for the entire summer season of 4 months in these, like the same tent I would take with me to Banff. With nothing, that's it. They've got 4 tents and their job is to try to restore this hut and to try to shore up like all of these fences that have been put up or by these Argentinians to try to preserve this site because it's so famous. The historian that was on our ship was in his late 70s, and he's British, and he has been at the negotiation table of these Antarctic treaties. He wasn't there in 1959, but he actually came for the first time in the early 60s. So he's been in the Antarctic for 50 years. He's overwintered more than once. He's run a research station. He's been the treaty gets renegotiated every year. There's like an annual meeting where everybody brings their complaints and, they try to work it out. So he's been at that table. So he's extremely knowledgeable. And he had never been to this site and had wanted for 50 years to come here. So he was beyond excited. This is probably him right here. He was the first one kind of allowed up there to check it out. And these are the 6 men of the Nordenskjold expedition. You can see they didn't have crampons, Gore-Tex, down, right? They had wool, canvas, clothing. I have no idea how they survived. So the black and white theme continues. Not only is the land black and white, but all the inhabitants. The penguins, these are cormorants. The seals, they're all black and white. So this is us kind of, it's the same day as what you just saw. Now it's smooth, it's not raining, and it was like spectacular, and the sun is shining off all the icebergs. So the weather could change, literally from 1 hour to the next. So this is a closer up of another different Adelie colony. And again, this time you can see the babies a little bit more clearly. And you can see the babies are actually bigger than the parents because the parents are basically giving all their fish to the babies. The reason is the babies can't swim yet because they have these fluffy feathers, not their like mature swimming feathers. And you can see they're just starting to molt. So these babies are probably about maybe 6 weeks old. They were probably born in December. And at a certain point, they molt. So all their feathers are going to fall off. And you can see that's already happening. They're looking a little bit scraggly. And then when they grow their black and white mature feathers, they'll go to the water and they'll spend the entire year in the water until the next breeding season. The young ones don't breed the first couple of years, so they'll literally stay in the water for 2 or 3 years before they come back to this exact spot to breed themselves. Penguins live, believe it or not, for 20 to 30 years, and they mate for life. So all of the penguin pairs will come back every year to this exact place, and they'll have the same mate. I don't think they stay with the mate all year in the water, but I think they find them again when they come back. But Marcelo, the Brazilian ornithologist who was on our ship, said they do sometimes get divorced, like sometimes there's like incompatibility. And if one of the partners dies, then the other one will typically find a new mate. You can see this baby right here, the whole front is pink. So obviously that baby was literally lying in the dirt and got all the guano on his front. I think this is one of my prize pictures. So these are Adelies. I'm going to show you a bunch of different penguin species. So you can see their beaks are kind of a nondescript light pink color, and they have a white circle around their eyes. And you can see here, they don't look like a torpedo. It's only when they're porpoising. So now this is Elephant Island. So remember where it was, little tiny dot in the middle of nowhere. And you can see it's just stunning, right? There's very steep cliffs with glaciers. And the only place we did not land, because there's literally no place to land, the only place that you could potentially land would be this one tiny spit of land on the entire island. The rest is sheer cliffs. So why is Elephant Island famous? It's famous because of Ernest Shackleton. Some of you know the story, but for those of you who don't, I'll just give you the background. So in this heroic age, where everybody wanted to be the first to get to the South Pole, by the teens of like the 19 teens, the race was on. And there were 3 main contenders. There was Scott, who was British. He made it almost to the South Pole, like literally within a couple of miles, again, using imperial measurement. But unfortunately, he had to turn back and his entire expedition crew died because it's really inhospitable. Then there was Roald Amundsen, who was Norwegian. He spent a huge amount of time in the Arctic. When I was lucky enough to go to the Arctic in 2016, we heard about him at length. He was racing to be the first one to get to the North Pole as well. And he was racing against Franklin, who is the ill-fated British explorer, who many of you know had 2 boats, and they both were crushed and sunk, and Franklin and all of his crew died. Mostly they died because they didn't listen to the Inuit. So Roald Amundsen went to the Arctic, lived for like a few years among the Inuit, learned how to speak Inuktitut, learned how to drive dog teams, and listened to everything they said and like put it into practice. And he was the first man to the North Pole. And he successfully, and nobody died. So Roald Amundsen decided he would build upon that success, and he took a whole bunch of dog teams to the Antarctic, and he was racing to the South Pole. Ernest Shackleton wanted to beat him. He also was smarter than Franklin. He took the lessons of Amundsen. He imported like, I think it was 45 huskies from Northern Canada. He set off to the Antarctic, and his goal was not only to get to the South Pole, but was to traverse the entire continent, which is like 3,000 miles or some incredible distance. The plan was he in his ship, the Endeavour, would go to the north. There's no north. Would go to the South American side, so kind of where we were, in something called the Weddell Sea, which is the sea just to the east of the peninsula that I just showed you. They would walk and ride the dog sleds to the South Pole. Meanwhile, another ship, it might have been Norwegian, in fact, was going to come from the Australian side, so kind of directly across, and they were going to go on land and leave a whole bunch of food caches. Because there's no food in Antarctica, the only food is around the edge. That's where there's seals and whales and penguins. In the middle of the continent, there's no food. So these Norwegians were going to leave food caches so that when Shackleton's men passed the South Pole and were heading to the Australian side, they would have food and they wouldn't die. So that ship was successful. That ship, they left all the food caches and they left. And they were going to come back the next year to pick up the men. Remember, there was no GPS, right? So this is like fraught. Big continent. They had compasses, but compasses are notoriously inaccurate when you get close to the pole. They actually don't work because the magnetic pole is constantly shifting. So believe it or not, the magnetic South Pole is somewhere in the Antarctic Ocean, somewhere between Antarctica and Australia. It's not even close to the actual South Pole. So Shackleton came via South Georgia, which was a frequent stopping off point. And on South Georgia were mostly Norwegians and Scots. They were in the sealing and whaling trade. And the Norwegian head, or I don't know, boss of the whaling station at Stromness said to Shackleton, kind of like the Inuit saying to Franklin, you know, we'd recommend that you use dogs. He said to Shackleton, you know what, it's a really bad year for ice. I would recommend you don't go this year and you come back next year. And he's been there for maybe decades, right? So he knows the landscape. But when you want to be the first, you don't pay attention and you don't listen to advice. So Shackleton's ship gets to the Weddell Sea. It's in midsummer, but nevertheless, the ice is so thick that he can't get to the land. So they wait in the ship, and a very frequent thing that would happen is they just sit there. When winter comes, they get encased in ice and they just hang out. Can you imagine people in our day and age just hanging out, not doing anything for months at a time? And then when the ice melts the following year, you're going to be fine and you can go upon your way. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. They got encased in ice and the ship was crushed. So when the ship was crushed, and Shackleton had a photographer on board, Frank Hurley, an Australian, who in the night, like this is 1913, was already taking moving pictures and had like some of the most advanced ideas about photography ever. And there's footage of the ship being crushed and falling over that he took that is like second to none. You can probably find it online if you look it up. So the ship got crushed. They had to take everything off the ship and they put it on the sea ice and they hung out there until the sea ice melted. So now they have nothing. All they had was 3 wooden lifeboats with oars, not covered, no mast, and no rudder, or like a very minimal rudder, not enough of a rudder for the open ocean. They had to put everything, so there's a picture that Hurley took of them dumping everything because the lifeboats were so small. There were 28 men, like literally Shackleton said, you can't even bring a picture of your wife, like nothing. We have to be bare bones here. So all three, they got into all three lifeboats and they rowed across 200 miles of open ocean from the Weddell Sea, which was a little bit south of where we were, to this Elephant Island. And they knew it was there. They were incredible mariners. Like most people today would have been long since dead because we're depending on GPS and all high technology. They got here, all three boats, and the only place they could land was this little spit of land. There's literally nowhere else. Now, this you can see has been taken over by the penguins. So all these little pointy things, those are all penguins. This little spit of land is not like the most hospitable place in the world. The ocean is constantly sweeping over it. So Shackleton decided this wasn't a good long-term prospect. He had his Scottish carpenter, who I think is the hero of the story, McNish, rebuild the biggest of the boats to kind of semi-cover it so that they wouldn't be constantly soaked with freezing 2-degree water. And he picked 5 people and they rowed to South Georgia, 700 miles away in the open ocean. They got there in May of 2015, so they made it, which is already striking. I'm going to show you some photos of where they ended up. When they got to South Georgia and they got to the whaling station, that same Norwegian, I don't know what you call him, the CEO of the whaling station was there. And I'm sure he wanted to say, I told you so, but I'm sure he was probably more gracious. So he actually gave them food and clothing. They immediately sent a ship because they came to the wrong side of the island. So they immediately sent a ship to the 3 guys that were left behind. And then Shackleton immediately went to Buenos Aires and spent the next 4 months trying to find a captain who would bring a ship back to this little spit of land to rescue the other 22 men. And no one would do it because it's midwinter. So they got there in May. May is the start of like the heavy Antarctic winter. Nobody would come. Finally, by August, 4 months later, he found a captain of a ship called the Uruguay who was willing to come, and they found all 22 men alive. They had been living under the overturned boats, barely, like, I can't even imagine the cold. Talk about purposeful intermittent cold exposure. This was like the extreme. And this is a statue to the captain who came because he was brave enough to take the risk. So it's so bizarre. You haven't seen anything made by humans ever for days, and now you come across like a statue. So it was pretty amazing to be there. And of course, in the evenings on the ship, we were watching all these movies about Shackleton, and I was reading the book called Endurance. So if you want to read the story, my recommendation is a book called Endurance, which is the name of the ship. It's not actually written by any of the crew. It's written by a journalist who, is usually a better writer, in 1959. So he interviewed the 5 still living men from that group and got their personal stories. And there's extensive archives in the British Geological Society archives, all of their diaries throughout the trip. And so he really did huge research. So I'm reading that book every night, and we were literally going to the places the next day. It was just mind-boggling. So this is where Shackleton's men rode to, South Georgia. Remember, they're coming from the southwest. And even though he knew the whaling stations were on the much more hospitable lee side of the island, out of the wind, they were too exhausted to row all around. So they landed right here in this little bay. And you can see there's basically a sheer cliff. And this white bit is mountains, and they're 4,000 meters or 10,000 feet tall. Their clothing is in tatters. they're black because they've been burning seal blubber for the last 2 years, and apparently it burns black. They have no crampons, no Gore-Tex, like no fancy equipment, no ropes, and they're climbing 10,000-foot mountains. He left 3 of his men here. He picked the 2 that he felt were the most fit. They got to the top of the mountain, and they knew they were in the right place because they heard the morning siren summoning at 7 a.m., summoning the men to work in the whale processing plant. So when they heard that noise, they knew they were safe, but they had no idea how they were going to get down, how they were going to descend that 10,000-foot slope, because remember, it's midwinter. It was all ice and snow. So they decided to go down on their butts, that if they actually tried to climb down, they would almost certainly die. So they slid down on their butts, and they ended up here at Stromness, and I'm going to show you some pictures of that in a minute. But first we went to Grytviken. Grytviken is the administrative capital of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. Nobody actually lives there. In winter, there's 7 people who, you know, work on contract, and in the summer there's about 35 people. So this is Grytviken. It's basically a whaling industry graveyard. So there's just tons of rusted out ships and whaling equipment. You can see here it's being reclaimed. All these little black things are all seals. This is what we call a red coat, one of our expedition guides. And if you look way back here, this is the modern administrative headquarters. So modern buildings, and our ship is right there. You can just see behind. So all these red roof buildings are where the administrators live when they're on contract here. As soon as our ship got here, a boat came out to the ship with 2 people, and they stayed on our ship the entire time we were in the South Georgia waters. And they were there to ensure that we were following protocol, biosecurity protocol. There's a bird flu in the world right now. Many of you know, many Canadian chicken farms have had to kill their entire population. And they are terrified that we will bring the bird flu and give it to the penguins. So we had to stay 5 meters away. We weren't allowed to kneel or bend over and be at the same level of the penguins. Are pretty small. They're like 2 to 3 feet tall. And all of our outerwear underwent flashlight inspection every single day. We couldn't have literally a speck of dust or a grain of any plant material anywhere on our outer gear, or we would not be allowed off the ship. So those 2 people were basically making sure we followed all the rules. So this is what the whaling, we'll call it a factory, looked like. Just like, you know, I grew up in Edmonton, where we have all these big refinery areas, and it looks exactly like this, except these are rusted. So they would kill the whales, they would take off the fat, they didn't care about the rest really, and they would kind of melt down the fat into oil, and they would store the oil in these huge, I don't even know what to call these, containers, and then they would ship it back to Europe. And in Europe, before petrochemicals were discovered, whale oil was how you lit your houses and how the street lights of London were lit. So Europe was absolutely dependent on whale oil. Some other parts of the whale were used, like the bones were used for some things. And there's a gland in the whale, ambergris. It has a molecule in it called ambergris, which is used in high-end fragrance, Chanel No. 5, for example. So some of the countries that are still whaling, in contradiction to the world don't whale anymore rules, are killing the entire whale just to get that ambergris molecule out of this small gland in the whale. There's 4 countries that are the main offenders. They're Japan, which is mostly killing the whales for meat, right? Because it's culturally like very yummy in Japan. And the US, mostly the whaling is going on in Alaska by Indigenous people. Same in Canada. Indigenous, the Inuit are allowed to kill so many whales per year. Norway and Iceland and US. So Norway, Iceland, Japan, and Russia are the 4 countries that are kind of whaling in against the rules, let's say, not just for sustenance of Indigenous people. And the other thing that was here in this location was the grave of Shackleton. So after Shackleton successfully rescued all himself and his 27 colleagues, they all went back to England. That was in August of 1915, in the middle of World War I. They were all of fighting age, they were all conscripted, and many of them were immediately killed, right, in the war. It's just like kind of a tragic story. In 1921, Shackleton decided he hadn't had enough and he wanted to come back. Believe it or not, 8 of his original crew volunteered to come back with him. I'm not exactly sure where they were planning to go. But what happened is when they got to Grytviken on South Georgia, Shackleton, who was 48, had a heart attack and died before he ever got back to Antarctica. His wife, long-suffering wife, apparently, Emily, gave kind of permission, or basically said, you know, he really wants to be buried there. So this is Shackleton's grave. Frankie Wild was his right-hand man, and he didn't die till 1939, but he also gave instructions that he wanted to be buried on South Georgia next to Shackleton. So there's a very tiny cemetery here, mostly the remains of whaling people, but these 2 explorers. So on South Georgia, we had you can see it's green. So literally just going 700 miles, a few degrees of latitude north, everything's different. No more black and white. Now we've got green. This is called tussock grass. And these are king penguins, so a different species. They're very obvious because of these beautiful yellow and orange patches. And they're like famous for kind of standing like that. And you can see they're heavy into molting. So their young have already left. We didn't see very many king penguin babies. They must be a bit earlier in the season. As soon as the babies leave, then the parents can molt because they don't have to be constantly fishing. So they're losing their feathers. And you can see here, the ground almost looks white. There was huge mounds of white that were penguin feathers. There's like hundreds of thousands of penguins, and they're all molting at the same time. And while they're molting, they can't swim. So that means it's metabolically challenging. They don't eat for 3 to 4 weeks until they grow their new feathers. And then they take off until the next year. So this is one of my favorite short videos. On South Georgia, there are hundreds of thousands of fur seals. So they are making a resurgence for sure, given that they're no longer allowed to be killed. The male and female fur seals come here in the spring, which is like November. They mate. I think maybe the mother has her baby first and then she mates, and that's kind of for the next year. The mothers go out fishing every day because they have to keep their energy up to nurse the young, and they leave the babies on their own recognizance. So I call this video Seal Kindergarten. So this was a couple dozen baby fur seals, like vocalizing and just, playing basically like any other mammal. They were adorable. Oh, here we go. You have to see it twice. And the weird thing was all the seals sound different. So you could just walk a few meters away and a different baby seal would sound totally different. So you can see there's just seals everywhere. If you look really hard on this field, there's literally thousands of seals, mostly babies, but a few mothers. This is Stromness. This is the mountain where Shackleton and his two colleagues slid down on their butts. It's midsummer, so much of the snow is melted, but in winter, this would all be white and ice. So we were allowed to land here. You can see there's mostly penguins and seals. And we were just entranced, taking heaps of photos. Then there's these cute little guys. These are Gentoo penguins. So you can tell them because they have bright orange beaks and they have what's called white earphones. So they have a little white strap and then just as if they were wearing earphones. I'm trying to remember what species are at the Calgary Zoo, but I'm very sure they have Gentoos there. And you can see that on their feet, they have very, very long claws. And this will become apparent. I'll show you what they help them do a little bit further on. And there's seals. So the seals are just mostly lying around. This is a beautiful day. Our ship. So on that day, it was easy to land. So another species of we'll call sea lion creatures was this elephant seal baby. Elephant seals are ginormous. They can weigh like 1,000 kilos. And the males, when they're breeding, have this kind of proboscis that comes out. That's why they're called elephant seals. This is a tiny baby. And this is actually a true seal. So it has no ear flaps. It can't hold itself up on its front legs. They're just like seeing them move on land is pretty humorous. All of the baby seals had snotty noses, I happened to notice. And these guys just had the cutest eyes. So they would just look at you like deeply and you'd be like in love immediately. And you can see on South Georgia, there's plants, right? So there's kelp. But then here, see all these little white things? These are all penguin feathers. I thought they were some kind of plant, but I was quickly someone explained, no, those are penguin feathers. And you can see that elephant seal is totally different from these baby fur seals, which are actually sea lions, so they're misnamed. They have ear flaps. They're able to hold themselves up on their flippers and they can hop around. There's two endemic birds in South Georgia. This is the South Georgia pintail. And the other one is the South Georgia pipit. And we were lucky to see both of them. And then there's this little guy who's like a leuco or white variant. So apparently about 1 in 100 seals are born white. They're not albino. But it seems like he's well accepted by his peers. So this is just a close-up of the Gentoos. Their feathers are so, it's almost like a scale-like pattern. And although we were supposed to stay 5 meters away, obviously the penguins didn't get the memo. So they just come popping out of the water and they're very curious and they just walk right up to you. Another really super calm day, like the weather just was so variable, gorgeous, right? Waterfalls everywhere because all the snow is melting. Another type of seal we saw is a leopard seal. I know seals eat fish, right? They're obligate carnivores. They don't eat any plants at all. But I also thought that seals ate penguins, but apparently most seals don't eat penguins unless they're really starving. but the leopard seals do eat penguins. So this is kind of one of the apex predators. And again, I'm wearing my big mitts. So you see the leopard seal. By the time I get my camera out and my mitts off, you know, he's almost gone. This leopard seal is pretty curious. So this is literally how close we were. And he came up to the Zodiac and he's trying to bite it, right? Because it looks black and it's in the water. It must be food. We were told, so I was right there and I'm like, whoa. But our guide told us actually the Zodiacs have 6 different compartments. So 2 or 3 can be popped by a leopard seal, no problem. We're not going to drown. So I felt a little better at that point. So I'm just going to play this just to give you a sense so you can see I've got many, many layers of clothing. I've got my life vest still on. You can see it's raining, kind of half rain, half snow.
Hi everybody, it's Thursday, February 2nd. I'm at Fortuna Bay on South Georgia Island in the midst of a huge group of penguins and also fur seals. If I change the direction of the shot, you can see a bunch of penguins. They're the little white guys, those are their stomachs. And it might be a bit harder to see, but in these fields are literally thousands of baby fur seals. They're adorable. They're kind of jousting with each other, literally running around. You can probably also see the weather is inclement, which apparently is very typical for the Antarctic, and especially for South Georgia Island. Now right there, in this direction, is a huge glacier. Actually, that's not the glacier. Yeah, that is the glacier. Yeah. So
you can see like this field went on for like a kilometer and the whole thing was just packed with penguins and seals.
Hi.
So the last stop on our trip was this surprise visit to the South Orkneys, which the captain had never been there before and no one on the expedition team had ever been there before. It's just really off the beaten path. So we felt incredibly lucky to get there, especially when we saw the scenery. So remember I showed you those claws, right, that are on the penguin feet? So this is a little very short video. Again, I missed like 75% of it because I got to get my mitts off and get on the right side of the Zodiac, and you're not supposed to stand up in the Zodiac, etc. But you'll just see the penguins would pop out of the water, hang on to this sheer ice cliff with their feet, and climb up. So we were watching one such occurrence. Like cheering him on. It was amazing. We have no idea why they go on icebergs because there's no food there. Maybe they're just resting. It's a bit hard to say. It's kind of like, why did the chicken cross the road? And this is probably my most scenic shot. So really amazing shaped iceberg with a whole little group of penguins. And you can't quite see it, but these are chin strap penguins, a different species. They have a little black stripe on their chin. So remember on South Georgia, I told you it was mostly babies, a few mothers when they were coming back from fishing. And I, being curious, was kind of like, well, where's all the male seals? Well, apparently they're all in the South Orkneys. So this is a huge glacier. And this is, it's kind of melted a little bit close to the water. And this is called a bachelor pad or a haul out. And this is all male seals, no females, no babies. So what happens is, unlike penguins, which mate for life, and 2 penguins, mother and father, look after their young equally, not so with seals. Like many other mammals, seals have harems, right? Like antelope and animals like that are the same. So the male seals in November, when they're on South Georgia, for an entire month, they're fighting for the right to mate. And the harems are so large that 85% of males never get the chance to mate in their lifetime, right? So only the biggest, toughest males get the opportunity to mate, and they have up to 40 females in their harem. This is my slide called post-exertional malaise. So these males are so exhausted, like hormonally and energetically, they swim down here, they haul out on the beach, and they literally lie there for at least a month. They don't even eat or go swimming. They're just truly exhausted. Like that one was putting its tail up and one was sitting up, but most of them were just lying there. There were fur seals, elephant seals, Weddell seals. They didn't care. They were just resting. So you can kind of see, this is a chin strap. They're little, and they have this little black line just along the chin. So this was also in the South Orkneys. And you can see here, the guano isn't pink, the guano is white. And that's because the chin straps eat a whole variety of fish, not only krill. So you can tell which type of colony you're approaching by the color of the guano. And here, barely see it, but this is a Weddell seal, which is kind of all white and dark blotches. So this is a chin strap, and these are two chin strap babies, which obviously they're not molting yet. So, you know, the season for the different species of penguins differs a little bit. And I just thought these guys were like beyond cute. They might make it into my Christmas card rotation. Unfortunately, this is nature, and not all penguins have a life of bliss. So this is a group of, I'm just blanking, it begins with an F, these birds. They're like giant seagulls, fulmars, and they're eating a chinstrap penguin who wasn't having a good day. And you can see them all up here. I don't know what happened. There's another seabird called a skua, again, like a giant seagull, and they're very aggressive. So the penguins on land don't really have a lot of predators, but if any one of them, especially a baby, shows like any weakness at all, the skua will just come in and basically kill it. This, we had the opportunity, if we wish, to go kayaking. I, as a non-kayaker, did not avail myself of that opportunity in like 2-degree water, but the people that did it said it was quite amazing. They had dry suits and multiple layers. And the South Orkneys, totally different, right, than anything we had seen up until then. So this is called Sunshine Glacier, a massive, massive glacier that covers a whole island, and all of this ice just breaking off. It was just spectacular. Like, what can you say, right? No words could describe this scene. So on this day, we didn't even get in the zodiacs. There was just like nowhere to go, right? Only sheer cliffs. So this is a picture from the ship. These are two more Weddell seals. Again, probably males just lying there, not moving whatsoever. And the very last thing we saw was a research station. So in the pre-COVID days, the tourist expedition ships would typically be invited to a research station. It was like a big highlight of the trip. Since COVID, no communication or close contact is allowed between us, who could be bearing germs, and the researchers who are here for 4 to 6 month contracts and have no way to get to medical care if they contracted COVID. So this is Sydney Station in the South Orkneys. It's a British research station. This is one of our zodiacs. So we were around the other side of the island, and this man comes running down. He's wearing this like fluorescent yellow jacket. He's like, hi, you know, because they haven't actually seen any other humans in like 3 or 4 months. So he just like desperately wanted to talk to us. And he says, come around the other side. We all want to talk to you. So we weren't allowed to land, but we kind of pulled up to their little dock here. and all the researchers came out, and they're mostly studying like mosses and lichens, which, as you can see, there's a lot of here. And they're also studying invasive species, both plants and animals. When even after the Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959, many of the species, like the albatross, were not coming back. I don't have any albatross pictures. I saw dozens of them. They're spectacular, but they're like birds and they're moving and they're really far away. If you look at my the professional photographer slides that I posted on YouTube, he has some great albatross shots. They're like just gorgeous. But the albatross were near extinction. And the reason was because the explorers, the whalers, and the sealers had brought unintentional and intentional foreign species. So the unintentional were the mice and the rats, who would actually eat the albatross chicks alive. Like the chick would be sitting there, the chick has no defenses, they have no natural predators, and the mice and the rats would just start eating them until they were dead. Like we saw a video, it was not a very pleasant experience. There were also intentional foreign species, such as reindeer. So the Norwegians thought it would be a great idea to bring reindeer so that they would have something to eat. Unfortunately, the reindeer ate all the grass. So there was nowhere for the seals. The seals actually kind of nest in the grass, and there was no way for the seabirds to make their nests. So in 1980, this 7-people government of South Georgia decided they were going to eradicate their island from all invasive species, plants and animals. They've spent 40 years doing it. And in like literally 2019, they announced that they were totally rid of all invasive species. It's an incredible effort. And as a result of that, the seabirds, including the albatross, are finally coming back. But albatross only have one baby a year. They don't even necessarily have a chick every year. So it's a really slow process, but I saw tons. So it seems like it's working. Oh, and the other reason they came running down to greet us at this research station is because they wanted fresh food. So they've been there for 3 to 4 months. They probably ran out of fresh food ages ago. And this is our fearless leader, Phil. So he went back to the ship, got a big basket of fresh food. Like they wanted coffee, tea, lettuce, and apples. So that's what we gave them. And I think, yes, so this is our expedition crew. There were 30. We were well educated. They were like adventurers, ornithologists, whale experts, penguin experts. This is John Dewdney, the historian, who was actually in the room for decades with these negotiations for the Antarctic Treaty. This is Marcelo, the most enthusiastic penguin person you will ever want to meet. Like these people are so knowledgeable. They've devoted their entire life to trying to save the planet, basically. It was just a privilege to soak up their knowledge. And then we came back to Ushuaia again through the Beagle Channel. And even though it was 3 weeks later, the light was still incredible. So this is me on the back of the ship with my very prized Antarctic jacket. So we had like an inner layer that we were allowed to take home with us, but the blue penguin layer we weren't. So it was just spectacular. That's it. And I'm going to stop my screen share. And just Megan will let you put your mics on, and I'm happy to take some questions. I guess I did go a bit over the hour. I apologize if some of you are crashing. But I get enthusiastic. It's so fun to talk about.
I have a question for you, Ellie.
Sure.
How would a patient with MEFM or MCS survive down there? Like, would the climate be supportive or unsupportive? Or make no difference whatsoever?
I would say the climate is not the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Like it's cold, but
Like
many of
some
us
people
on this
claim
call are
going to the
Canadian, huh?
Caribbean is a great thing to do. I just wondered if going to very cold would be a good thing to do,
Oh, well,
or
I
you got to
think
bundle up too much.
it would be more advantageous, like to practice intermittent cold exposure at home. Like I wouldn't go there for that purpose, let's just say.
Oh,
But you're at sea level, so a lot of people do better at sea level, and a lot of people don't like the heat. So if you're one of those, this would be an okay destination. What
mhm.
made it really challenging for me were the long flights. So it took about 36 hours to get
That's a
from
long
Calgary to
time.
Ushuaia. I am not very good sleeping sitting up. So I was pretty exhausted when I got there. The other thing that was really challenging is it is pretty rough. Like you could see some days were beautiful and smooth, but the majority of days, especially the days at sea, I didn't show you those pictures because they're just boring. But a lot of those days were quite rough. The trip before us, like immediately before us on the same ship, they had 9-meter waves, 9-meter swell.
Wow.
Apparently, so many people were vomiting that the ship doctor was like run off his feet starting IVs just to keep people kind of functioning. I was so grateful because I do not handle like movement. That's not one of my favorite things. So I was pretty worried about the trip, that specific aspect. And I'm just like, it's a fluke, right? You have no idea if the trip you've been waiting for 3 years to go on is going to be on the rough week or the calm week. So I would say if you're easily seasick, it might not be the trip for you. And it's hard to get patches are no longer sold in Canada. I managed to get some through nefarious means. So I had the patch on and I was doing fine. So one day after the third day, I thought, maybe I just don't need the patch. I'm doing neuroplasticity. I'm going to be good. Waves are good. I can handle this. No, it didn't work. So I was as sick as a dog. And I went about half a day and I put a patch on and it made a huge difference. So I'd say if you're going to go to anything, that's on the water, consider getting some patches. Any other questions?
I have tons, but
Anybody else?
I do.
Go ahead, Court.
Yeah. What is it about the Antarctic that grabbed your attention? And what's next on your bucket list?
Oh my gosh, two very probing questions. So what happened is I was fortunate enough in 2016 to go to the Arctic with my parents. It was kind of a bucket list for my parents. And one day my mom saw the ad in the she reads newspapers still. So she saw the ad in the newspaper that there was some big discount and last minute spots or something. So we went. It was amazing and not rough at all, just totally different than the Antarctic. And totally different because the Arctic has indigenous inhabitants, right? So we went to towns, we had Inuit interpreters on the ship giving us the whole history of the North. But on that ship, same ship, on that ship, a lot of people, you eat at meals with them and they're like, Ellie, if you think this is amazing, you have to go to the Antarctic where there's just like wildlife in abundance. So I had it in my mind ever since then. And then when my father went into long-term care, some of you know in 2018, my parents said, Ellie, you should really go. Like, don't wait. Stuff happens, life is unpredictable. So they actually contributed to my trip and really encouraged me to go. So I've been on a waiting list since 2019, but it kept getting canceled due to COVID. My next adventure literally just popped out at me yesterday, totally unexpected. So I may be going to Africa. We'll see. I have to get off the call in about 10 minutes because I have an appointment with my mother to go to the travel agent.
Which part of Africa?
She wants to go to Ethiopia to see the ancient Christian churches.
Okay.
And I want to go see the gorillas. So we're negotiating some kind of joint destination trip. We'll see.
Cool. Well, good luck. Good
Thank
luck.
you.
Yeah.
It's on land. I don't know that I'm going to do another ocean voyage. Like I was pretty happy. I loved every minute of it, but I was pretty happy to be back on land. Like I just felt queasy the entire time.
Yeah. Is the Antarctic, does it have more wildlife than the Arctic?
Oh, absolutely. Like in the Arctic, we would be excited if we saw 1 or 2 polar bears in a day. You know, here we're seeing like 10,000 seals in a minute.
Wow. Isn't
Yeah,
that
it's
something?
no comparison. It has the densest wildlife anywhere on Earth.
That's amazing. Way down there in those harsh conditions.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, if I can just put a slight political announcement. So the interpreters were constantly educating us, right? Do this, don't do this. This is good for the earth. That's bad for the earth. And one of the things I totally didn't know about, and it's relevant to all of you, is it's possible that krill is in danger. So because we fished out all other major species in the world, many countries are now fishing for krill. And krill is the basis of the entire world ecosystem, right? The ocean is the basis of the land ecosystem, and the krill is the basis of the ocean ecosystem. So they basically said, don't eat anything with krill. Don't buy krill oil. Like I know it's very trendy, right, as a source of omega-3 fatty acids. So they're just saying, don't do that. Find some other way. So spread the word. We got to save the world.
Will do. Will do. No
Okay.
more krill.
No more
Thank
krill.
Good to see you, Court.
Uh-huh. Hi.
All right.
Anybody else have a question?
Ellie,
Oh,
hi.
Janet, go ahead.
This was a pure delight to be here. Thank you so much for your incredible narration of your wonderful adventure. What an experience. I did have to leave temporarily, unfortunately. What was the name of the book you were reading?
Called
when you were-
Endurance.
Endurance, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yes.
is there a recording of this today that I could,
Yes.
I missed part of it. It was just exquisite.
Thank you. There is a recording. You probably all got that little message when Megan turned it on. It will probably take Michael maybe even a week. He's pretty overloaded, my person who edits my videos, but it will end up on my webpage, and I'll just have a little link on my homepage that anyone who wants to can click on it and watch anything they want.
Well, I can see it lit up your life and those beautiful photos, like just to see the vegetation and the lay of the land. It was just a miraculous experience to share it with you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Janet. Anybody else before we wrap up?
Quick question. Would you go there again? And if you did, I'd recommend you take like a GoPro camera that goes on your head so that you're just constantly videoing and edit it later.
That is such a good idea. I was of course, you know, I have my little camera and little phone, and there was people there with like massive equipment. Some of the expedition staff had GoPros. So for example, when we saw that leopard seal, one of the expedition staff had his GoPro in the water, and so we have like an amazing video of everything underneath that I couldn't see. Another really amazing thing happened twice. So I told you how the penguins porpoise and they come out of the water and they literally fly. You saw that. So on two occasions, it wasn't my Zodiac, but they literally flew and landed on the lip of the Zodiac. And two of the expedition staff who were driving the Zodiac were like, oh my God. So there's pictures, I think in the professional version. I think I didn't personally see it, but he's got pictures of the penguins up on the Zodiac. It's pretty adorable. So just weird stuff like unexpected stuff is sometimes the highlight moments.
You mentioned they don't have fresh food. Had they ever considered putting a building up and do hydroponic gardening within it to get veggies and things?
The amount of power it would take would be, it's minus 80.
Oh, I guess.
Yeah.
That's too
That's
bad.
too bad. The people who work at the research stations, they get flown in. They pretty much only fly in the summer. It's just too rough even for planes in the winter. But they fly in all of their supplies. So it's just like in the Arctic of Canada, all the supplies come in by ship in the summer, and in the winter you virtually can't get any fresh food or supplies. It's the same in the Antarctic, but it's, I'm sure they have ships, but it's mostly by plane because a lot of the research stations are a little bit inland.
But they get wind, do they not? Get wind power?
Incredible lake.
Could they not generate enough wind power?
Oh, I see. I think it would break the turbines. Like it's like
oh, really?
most of the year. Yeah. I'm sure they've thought of it. I'm sure if they're
they have. Sometimes they miss the obvious.
It's true.
It's
Like
so into the
detail,
detail, they miss something obvious.
Yeah, it's true.
Look fascinating. I'm glad you had such a great trip.
Yeah, thank you. To answer your first question, I personally will not go back. It was just like being nauseous.
Once in a lifetime.
I feel like I've seen it. Like there's people who are addicted and they go back every year. I don't think there's so many other places I want to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Anybody else? Okay.
What is it like living in brightness all day long?
Well, I wouldn't call it bright. I would call it kind of dusky. But
it must really
just like I grew up in Edmonton. Exactly the same.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so I'm quite used to it. Like Edmonton doesn't really get dark until about 11 and the sun comes up at 3. Lorraine, she's from the Edmonton area. So that part was just kind of normal. Someone I think in the chat, I wasn't paying attention. Someone said my tour operator. So the company that I went to the Arctic is called Adventure Canada. I have the highest regard for the company. It's a family-run business out of Ontario. They just look after their people and all of their trips. The ship is old. It's not luxury, but the customer service is amazing. So for that reason, I went with them for the Antarctic. So the ship spends summer in the Arctic and our winter in the Antarctic. Unfortunately, due to COVID. I was the company would go under before I would get a chance to go because they're a small family-owned company and they didn't do any tours at all for 2 years. They survived luckily, and in order to do the Antarctic trip, they collaborated with a tour company called Intrepid out of Australia. I think they're quite well known. If you go on, like they do worldwide travel. They were okay. I wouldn't say they have quite the same quality of customer service as Adventure Canada, but the cost is pretty good. It was definitely at the lower end of what that trip cost. Like I've talked to people who paid two or even three times more than what I paid. So. There's all from what we were on to like ultra deluxe where you're flying around in helicopters and stuff. I even talked to someone recently who flew to the Antarctic Peninsula and met the ship there and didn't have to cross the Drake Passage. That sounded quite inviting.
Could you take a drone with you?
They're not allowed anywhere in the Antarctic.
Darn.
Explicitly forbidden.
Are you doing any more of these presentations?
No, probably that's it. I've done about 10 actually. This is like my last one. I just saw a question. What did they do with human waste? So my belief, I'm not 100% sure on the research station. So it's leave no trace. So even though they have research stations there, I'm pretty sure they fly or ship out all waste and all food waste. They just don't want to risk any I don't know, change to the ecosystem from human presence. So I have a feeling everything is shipped out. Yeah. Thanks everybody. I'm
No,
gonna
thank
turn
you,
it-
Ellie.
Thanks, Ellie.
You're welcome.